Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. One of the types of comments that I get most frequently on the show, and one of the types of conversations that I have most often, is with teachers who are frustrated with the public education system and are looking to leave, or people who have already left careers in public education because they're so frustrated with the system. I feel like I talk to people every single week that have stories about how they started their careers working in public education. They thought they were going to do it forever, and they became so frustrated by what's happening in the classroom, the very top-down test prep-centric education and curricula that they were required to be running, the bureaucracy that they were getting stuck inside of. And these people have so many different stories about what it was that caused them to leave and what they looked to do after they had left. And I want to talk today about some of the most interesting stories that I have heard and some of the things that educators can do if they want to get out of public education, but they still want to work with kids. Because most people get into education for very noble reasons. They want to work with kids. They want to help kids. They want to be a meaningful and positive force on a young person's life and trajectory. And people invest a lot of time and energy into becoming teachers. It's a lot of work to go through the preparation, the training, all of the education to be ready to work in a classroom. And people don't always want to throw that away just because they become frustrated by the system. My friend Samantha Westmoreland, who I had on the show a couple of months ago to talk about her work in the Montessori world and how Montessori teaches literacy to kids, talked about this, about how she started her career as a public school teacher. She was very optimistic. She was very idealistic. She had high hopes for her career in education, and she became so frustrated and demoralized by what was happening in the classroom that she burnt out on working in public education. And it wasn't until she got into the world of Montessori and started getting back to the roots of why she loved education so much and why she loved kids so much that she started to feel her optimism again about both the future and our kids, but also about education as a field. And anyone who's read Samantha's work or heard her on a podcast knows that she is an incredibly vibrant and positive and energetic person. And the fact that the public school system could burn her out so badly is a tragedy, but it happens all the time. I've had a few people on the show who have told stories in various capacities about getting out of conventional education for various reasons. I had Claire Honeycutt on the podcast a few months ago talking about her experience being a professor in the largest public university in America, ASU, and why she left her job to homeschool her kids. There are many stories of people who have started their career in education, whether it's primary, secondary, post-secondary, and leave the education system to focus on their own kids. I've heard people say in my comment section many times, I am a teacher and I would never subject my children to what happens in a public school classroom. When I have kids, we're getting out. And about a year ago, I had Ryan Delk on the podcast, who's the founder of Primer, a network of micro schools that's started in Florida but is expanding across the country. And he told the story of how he got into the micro school movement in the first place. And the story starts with his mother, who was a public school teacher, said homeschoolers must be crazy. People should not be allowed to homeschool their kids. Worked in public education, had children, said, I cannot send my children here. This is not a good way to educate them. Pulled them out of public school, quit her job, and started a micro school where she was educating her kids and other local kids and delivering an amazing and very bespoke education experience to them, which is the inspiration and the underpinning of what Ryan is now building with Primer to serve as many kids as possible with a similar method. I've had many people on the podcast talking about their experiences getting out of public education, but I've had even more conversations offline. I hear from people all the time who have gotten out because they couldn't stand the public system anymore, or who are looking for options and are trying to figure out what to do, because it's hard to make a career pivot like that, especially when you've spent years or decades investing in something that you think is going to be a lifelong career. And one of the things that I talk about a lot on the show, and one of the things that I hope if you listen to a few of these videos, you start to feel as strongly as I do, education as a field, as a discipline, as a pursuit is so much bigger than the public institutional system that many of us spent our whole lives engaging with. And there are so many other ways to both educate kids, but also to build a career in education. And so that's what I want to talk about today. All of the other things that educators can do besides working in public school if they are fed up with the public school system, and rightfully so, and are looking for something else. Because I've heard many stories from people of the different paths that they've taken and the things that they've done. And I want to share a few of my favorites. And I want to share some of the ways that I think about different paths in education so that hopefully they can be helpful for you too. I was talking a while back with one of the women who was writing for me at Rebel Educator, and she was pitching me on an article idea, which was documenting the exodus of young teachers from the public education system. And the way she pitched that story to me is that she was a recent college graduate. She'd been out of school for a year or two at this point. And she had graduated with a lot of friends who had studied education, and they were going into the public school world. And a lot of them were already quitting. They were doing 1 or 2 years on the job, and they were saying, I cannot do this for my whole career. And they were leaving to go find other opportunities because they found the classroom environment so stifling. And she thought that was a really interesting story. I thought that was a really interesting story. We started to dig deeper into what was happening in the classroom, and I started having more and more conversations with people who were drawn to the content that we were creating because it was reinforcing what they were experiencing inside of the classroom. Ana Fabrega is another great example of someone who was working in public schools and couldn't take it anymore. She wrote an entire book on why she thinks the way we teach kids in classrooms is very destructive to the kids. And she spent a lot of her time in the classroom breaking all of the rules, or as many as she could get away with, to deliver an education for her students that she thought was actually benefiting them and not just serving the system. And I think this is one of the things that really frustrates people who are working in education and they got into it for very noble reasons. And again, when I criticize public education, I'm not criticizing the teachers. And I always try to make that very clear. And I want to make that very clear here too. I think that most teachers get into education for extremely good reasons. They want to help kids learn and grow. They want to be a positive influence on their students' lives. And just like the kids, they're getting stiffed by a system that isn't designed with their best interests in mind. The education system isn't designed to allow teachers to do the things that they wanted to get into education in the first place to do. They're existing in a world where the walls are slowly closing in closer and closer on them as the regulations get deeper and the rules get more restrictive. In the same way that the education system isn't designed with the needs of the individual child at its center. And teachers feel often extremely constricted by the rules that are put in place for them and the conditions that they're being forced to teach in. And I hear frequently from teachers who feel that it's been getting worse and worse over the course of their careers. Teachers are very often in education for all of the right reasons, and we need a world in which teachers can do the job that they set out to do, which is inspire their students and work with them one-on-one and help them tap into their passions and connect their passions to the foundational skills that kids are expected to learn in the classroom and understand the connection between building these foundational skills and pursuing their passions and mentoring and coaching and facilitating and supporting young people in their growth and their exploration of the world. So many people get into the field of education because they want to do those things. And yet school systems are becoming more and more constrictive and restrictive about what teachers can and can't do. And there's been a very significant trend towards spending more and more of your time focused on test preparation and making sure you're just meeting the bare minimum standards, which from a motivation standpoint completely backfires because kids don't want to spend their time doing that. And so you end up fighting the kids in your classroom who are all at varying points in their academic journey and have different levels of mastery of different subjects. And you can't teach the same thing to every kid in the classroom and have them all get it at the same level and progress in unison through a concept. And so you're left teaching a classroom of kids aiming as close to the middle as you possibly can get, knowing that some kids are bored and ahead and some kids are frustrated and behind, and there's nothing you can do about it. Your hands are tied and you're being forced to put all of your attention on test scores because that's what your school district is being graded on. That's where your funding comes from. It's a system that's designed to fail, not intentionally, but effectively. It's designed for failure. And teachers are frustrated by it and they want to get out. And I don't blame them. But I do feel very strongly like there are many other ways to do the type of work that teachers get into the field of education in the first place to do. Ways of doing that work that are less bureaucratically overseen, have fewer rules and regulations, have fewer shackles that are preventing you from doing the type of work that you actually got into the field to do. And so that's what I want to talk about. All of the other things that teachers can do if they want to get out of public education. My favorite question to ask teachers when they tell me about trying to get out of public education is, have you heard of the micro school movement? Because micro schools are a phenomenal outlet for teachers who want to really develop relationships with their students and want to have time to focus on each student individually. Because of the nature of a micro school, you're often working with a smaller number of students, often in the like 5 to 10 to 15 student range versus the 25 to 30 that you have in a public school classroom. And you're often working with mixed ages. So you have a broader variety of different levels at which you're meeting each one of your students. But because it's a smaller group of kids, you're able to focus more deliberately on each student. And a micro school is often very family and community centric. So you're interacting not just with your kids, but with their parents, maybe their older siblings, the community that they're in. And because you don't have all of the bureaucratic oversight of a public school system, everything about a micro school is small and local. You get to spend all of your time focused on the kids and their learning experience and their exploration journey of the world around them. I've talked to a number of teachers who have exited their public school jobs to start a micro school. They often find a small group of people locally who are interested in a micro school. They do a lot of community outreach to find those initial families that they're going to start a school with. And because it's small and less regulated, there are a lot fewer hoops that you have to jump through to get one off the ground. In some states, your students aren't even necessarily enrolled in a school. They might be legally homeschooling, but they come and hang out at your micro school all day, and you're the one who's actually delivering the homeschooling experience to them. They can exist anywhere on the continuum between a homeschool co-op, which is extremely unregulated and unstructured, all the way through to an actual formal school that's registered with the state, depending on where you are and the type of school that you want to be launching. But generally speaking, there's a lot less regulation around how you're delivering your education. Your school could be hosted in your church. It could be hosted in a community space. It could be hosted in your living room. And you're able to pour all of your time and attention not into making sure that your classroom is up to your school's standards, but that you're actually delivering a quality education to each individual child that you have under your care. The micro school movement, it has been a really amazing avenue for teachers trying to get out of public education. A lot of the micro schools that are popping up all across the country, and there are many of them, it's a movement with a lot of momentum, have been launched by people who used to be public educators and they loved the essence of their job, but who hated the system that they were working within. And so they left and they started a school of their own. If you're interested in the micro school movement, I highly, highly recommend checking out the work of Carrie McDonald. I had her on the show a while back. She's amazing. She's one of the primary documentarians of the micro school movement. She has a podcast where she interviews micro school founders multiple times a week and talks to them about the businesses that they're building and the educational approaches that they're facilitating. And it's an amazing wealth of content for someone who wants to get into building a micro school. Highly recommend going down that rabbit hole. But this is a great place to start if you want to be teaching and you don't want to be stuck in a bureaucratic system and you have a little bit of an entrepreneurial streak that makes it feel attainable and exciting to you to start something of your own. This is a phenomenal way to build a business where, because you don't have all of the overhead of a large institution, you can charge tuition for 10 or 15 kids and pay yourself a living wage and cover the cost of your materials without having to pay for a lot else, which enables you to replace the income that you were getting in public school in an arguably much better working environment. If the entrepreneurial side of building a school doesn't appeal to you, but the structure of a micro school does, there are still a lot of options. There's a network of schools called Prenda that's based in Arizona, but has spread to a number of different states that supports founders in building their own schools so that you don't have to do all of the work from the ground up to build your own school, but you're able to use their template, their playbook, their support to get a school off the ground without having to do all of the operations and admin yourself. Another great option is to tap into the Primer Micro School Network. They have cohorts of people who they train in all of the elements of building a micro school. And at the end, you can go and launch a Primer location. So again, you have the support of a larger network of schools, a larger company that's carrying a lot of the burden of operations and admin and structure for you so that you can focus primarily on the things that you care about, which is educating kids and the actual academic experience rather than getting mired down in operations that maybe aren't interesting to you or maybe aren't your strong suit or maybe just aren't what you want to spend your time doing, which is totally understandable. But the micro school movement in general is one of the first places that I bring up when I'm talking to teachers trying to get out of the system, because sometimes it's a really good fit and it allows a lot of freedom where you can design an education in the way that you feel is best for the kids in the classroom, in your classroom, but also in the way that you most want to teach. You can start a nature-centric micro school where you have your kids spending a lot of their day outside. You could start an entrepreneurial-leaning micro school where you are attracting kids who want to spend their time building small businesses and you're supporting them in those endeavors. You can build something that's really tailored around your interests, your strengths, the interests of the students you're attracting, and you can have a lot of fun in ways that you don't always have time to do when you're stuck administering a very bureaucratic curriculum that is structured in a way that eats all of your time, so you don't have any left to do the actual fun parts of an education. Another great option, if you want to get out of public education, you're still interested in teaching in a classroom setting, but you don't want to go through the process of actually creating your own school, is to look for different private and particularly alternative models in your area, especially if you're in a more suburban or urban area. There likely are a fair number of alternative schools in your region that you can look at. Acton academies are a personal favorite of mine. The Acton model is very student-centric, and teachers aren't actually called teachers. They're called guides. They're not actually doing day-to-day teaching as much as they're doing facilitating of the kids in the classroom and the experience the kids are having, while the kids are the ones who are self-directing their education. You can look for Acton academies in your area. You can look for other types of alternative and self-directed or student-centric programs and learning centers and schools. Becoming a Montessori guide, if you're interested in younger year education, can be extremely refreshing after a public school experience, as Samantha Westmoreland was talking about in her podcast episode a couple of months ago. That was her journey going from public school to the Montessori world. And some Montessori schools have elementary, middle, and high school programs, and those can also be a really great place to look. Another great program to watch is Alpha School, which is based in Austin, Texas. Their flagship location is here, but they're rapidly expanding across the country, and they're always hiring guides. They use the same nomenclature model as Acton. Instead of their teachers being called teachers, they're called guides. They're not actually doing formal classroom instruction. They're coaches and mentors and facilitators for their students. And they don't strictly hire teachers. They hire people from lots of different backgrounds, but that can be another great program to keep an eye on. And they're rapidly expanding across the country. So even if they don't have a location geographically close to you and you can't relocate, they may have one coming, and it may be a program worth keeping your eye on. In the vein of all of these alternative schools, there is a talent dearth in alternative education. It's hard for a lot of these programs to hire really great people for not only their academic roles, but their non-academic roles. And if you're interested in the field of education more broadly and more philosophically, there can be a lot of opportunity here if you start digging in. I know multiple alternative education programs right now that are hiring directors of marketing, salespeople, evangelists. There are programs who are looking for heads of academics. There are all different sorts of administrative and business jobs in these school networks and in these alternative programs, where if you're interested in getting into the business of the movement at large, there can be tons of opportunity there. If anything that I'm talking about in this vein resonates with you, send me a DM on X if you're on X, or send me a DM on Instagram. I would love to send some particular roles your way. I am friends with a lot of people who are building these different schools, and I get links sent my way sometimes to job postings that I'm happy to share. There's a ton of opportunity if you're interested in getting into the building of these networks at large. There's also the more standard private school route, which can also be really refreshing for teachers who want to get out of public education. There may be private or charter schools in your area who have a more student-centric approach, or who are growing quickly and have talent needs. I hear again and again and again from people who are building schools that the staffing of their schools is one of their highest priorities, because that's what makes or breaks their education experience that they're delivering to their customers. And finding great talent is hard. And so there is a market demand for people who want to get out of public education, who want to deliver a really quality education to students in a different format, and who feel strongly about this student-centric approach. And so I would encourage you to dig into some of the different school networks and independent schools in your area, because there's a strong probability that there are a number of them who are on the lookout for quality talent. But classroom education isn't the only place that you can put your teaching skills to use. One-on-one tutoring is another really great option. If you're more interested in working with kids one-on-one, teaching classes to homeschoolers or to a homeschool co-op is a great option. When I was growing up homeschooled, our co-op would always hire people to teach specific classes. Like, all the parents would sort of pool their resources together to hire a Spanish teacher and a drama teacher, and like these different sort of specializations that the parents felt less equipped to teach themselves. And there may be opportunities to do those sorts of teaching gigs locally rather than doing a more formal school style education experience. And another thing that's really changed about the way that education is delivered is the internet. We live in a world that's more and more trending towards these sort of celebrity instructors, for lack of a better term, people like Saul Khan, who are really, really good at teaching and start something like Khan Academy just on YouTube, creating videos teaching different math topics to kids who eventually build more and more traction and influence because they're so good at what they do. And for people who feel like they are really good at instructional teaching or at lecturing or at delivering, explaining concepts really clearly, there is a huge market for people who are really good at teaching things. And we live in a world where the rewards for being good at that are basically uncapped because you can reach anyone on the globe through a platform like YouTube teaching something that you have a specialization in. So I also would think about projects that have reach, things like starting an educational YouTube channel or creating a video series for homeschoolers that you can sell online. Things like that can be extremely viable business models, but they can also be really great ways to help kids beyond just your local school district who would really benefit from the particular skill set that you have. If that's an area of interest for you, there's a lot of opportunity there. Obviously, there are tons and tons of other things that you can do. The possibilities really are endless, but these are a few of my favorites that I've heard public school or former public school teachers talk about in their own career paths. They're things that I've experienced up close and that I recommend to people. So these are just a few of my favorites. I would love to hear in the comments if you have a similar experience, if you've been on a similar journey and you found some other path for yourself. I'd love to hear about what you've done and what's worked for you. If you have other ideas, share them in the comments. Hopefully, some of you find this video helpful. Please reach out if you have additional questions. I have a lot of conversations with people who are former public school teachers or looking to exit the system, and I am happy to help however I can. Thank you so much for being here. I will talk to you all next week.